I just finished my first playthrough of Greedfall, and I thought that in this spoiler-free video, it could be a great idea to talk a bit about who I think Greedfall is for, and explain a little bit what Greedfall is all about. Actually, let's go back to the moment when I, myself, was wondering if I should buy Greedfall. I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit lost as to what I should even expect from the game. I heard in a couple of places that it was a party-based CRPG, but then I'd watched the trailers and all that, and I felt more confused than anything, so really this is the kind of video that I wish I could have seen before buying the game, and hopefully it's going to be helpful for you. So, welcome to Paradoxia Gaming. In this video we'll cover topics such as the companion feature, the lack of depth of certain mechanics, the main strengths and weaknesses of the game, and finally we'll conclude everything with a summary and final recommendation. Let's jump in! Let's begin by addressing the party-based part of Greedfall right away and the impact or depth that you can expect from your companions. If you're jumping into this game with the expectation that it will be similar to something like Dragon Age Origins, Divinity Original Sin, Pillars of Eternity, or anything like that really, then you are probably going to be really disappointed. In this game, the companions have a very limited impact on combat. In fact, there are only a couple of ways in which you can interact with them during encounters. For example, you can heal them with certain skills, revive them, you can also choose the items that they wear, but you cannot control them at all. So you can't switch to their character, choose which enemies they'll target, which skills they'll use, or even just which skills they have. They're still fighting alongside you, but their main purpose in the game is to follow you on your journey, be a central aspect of many of the quests, and add interesting dialogue. There are also some companion-specific quest lines that are pretty compelling and definitely lead to a lot of personal growth and development. They definitely felt pretty important for the characters, so it's something I definitely enjoyed, at least for the two companion stories that I actually finished. There is also the option to romance some of them. I don't know much about romance as a whole in the game, but my character ended up romancing who I wanted him to romance, so that's about how far my understanding of that feature goes. To conclude this section on companions, I want to briefly add that the companion limit is actually 2. So your party will be made up of 3 members, and that includes you. That's a fairly low number compared to some of the other popular titles, so clearly Greedfall is doing things quite a bit differently when it comes to its companion feature. Now that we got the companions out of the way, let's focus on the areas where this game is held back by its limited amount of resources. I want to kick things off by saying that a lot of the things I'll mention in this section are actually well done. It's really a matter of lack of variety or depth that leads to some frustrations, but overall Greedfall does deal pretty well with its limitations in my opinion. So the first thing on the list is everything related to art. The music is pretty solid overall, but be ready to hear a lot of the same tracks, and while exploring, expect to see a lot of similar areas. Every once in a while there'll be something that was absolutely worth the wait, but it isn't as frequent as it probably should be. Similarly, voice acting is pretty good, but holy are they often using the same voice actors. It's a bit immersion breaking when you can easily tell that the person in front of you is voiced by the exact same person as one of your companion. As I was progressing in the story, I would constantly notice how they kept reusing the same people, and it's not really something that bothers me tremendously, but it's definitely worth a mention. Next is combat. There's a lot of good which we'll talk about later, but overall it really feels like combat is an afterthought in Greedfall, unfortunately. For starters, enemy variety is very low. Most of the time they'll be very similar in appearance and maybe have 1 or 2 different abilities, but overall many of the enemy packs you'll encounter will end up feeling extremely redundant and will play out very similarly. The same goes for character customization. Making build choices feels very limited, and by the end of the game I was almost unsure about where to put my skill points since I felt like I already had everything I wanted for my magic build. If I were to make another character and focus on magic once more, both characters would probably end up looking very similar, even if I wanted to try different things. There are also talent and attribute points in the game though. Talent points will let you specialize in things like lockpicking, science will allow you to craft more potent potions, craftsmanship will help with crafting, etc. And then attribute points basically give you stat increases and unlock the ability to wear certain pieces of gear, things of that nature. In my experience, it's all fun to interact with, but similarly to the combat, it's pretty straightforward and it clearly lacks depth. I could go more in depth and talk a bit more about alchemy, crafting, the items and all that, but I feel like I'd probably sound like a broken record. Just expect something that's pretty shallow, but it's still there, it's pretty fun to interact with, sure, it's pretty much frictionless, sure, but it's not going to require much brain power at all. Okay, so the last thing I want to cover in this section about the lack of resources is the sometimes pretty abysmal quest execution, especially for side quests. You're ready for some things that you really wish you could see to happen off screen, or some quests that feel elongated for no good reasons. Things like that. It's hard to fully drive the point home without spoiling anything, but definitely expect a couple of moments that will have you scratching your head in terms of quest execution. There's usually still some value to get in most of them, but consider skipping some of the optional content if you feel like it's low quality. I personally definitely skipped a decent amount, but there are also some that I'm definitely glad I completed. Alright, so what are the main things that might make Greedfall worth a playthrough for you? What are its strengths? Well, the main story is very good. It definitely has some pacing issues and it's not all shiny, but it's pretty damn solid. It's filled with intense political situations in a well-crafted world, with different factions that are interacting with each other in ways that will keep you hooked and wondering what the next twist will be. There are a bunch of important choices to make and important consequences as a result, and I really enjoyed how this game is one big, coherent story that is built up over time. A lot of characters are pretty deep and compelling, and definitely worth investing some time into in my opinion. The combat also feels pretty polished for what's actually in the game. The sounds are satisfying, and from the testing I did with magic, melee, and rifles, it all felt pretty snappy and smooth, with melee being the weakest of the three. The boss fights can be visually and thematically very impressive, while unfortunately suffering from many of the same mechanical problems where they're quite simplistic. I think that overall Greedfall plays to its strengths pretty well and isn't trying to be something that it isn't. It allows you to interact with a bunch of systems that are pretty shallow, but frictionless and almost optional, allowing you to focus on what this game truly is about, the story and its characters, as well as its beautiful world and art. Add on top of it all that it took me around 25 hours to complete, and the downsides don't really have the time to become overly annoying. And if you have a lot of fun, I can easily see how you could spend maybe 10-15 additional hours on the additional content in the game. Now, to sum up some of the bad, well, obviously there are all of the things that are a result of the limited resources, as I already discussed, but you can also expect some pretty annoying map layouts, a lot of walking, and just overall some pretty frustrating navigation. Also, as I mentioned recently, there are some pacing issues with the main story, and I'd say that some of the main quests sometimes end up feeling quite similar and explore some similar topics. Something that's easy to forgive though when you actually get to see the eyes of the story. But overall, maybe the most important thing that I need to mention again in this section, and probably the biggest takeaway, maybe for some people, should be just how weak and shallow a lot of the gameplay systems are. This is not a strategy-heavy game or a title in which you can get lost in the depth and complexity of its systems. It's actually quite limited, and it won't be for everyone. And the same goes for all the things I said about the companions earlier. So, at its core, I'd say that Greedfall is a game with an inconsistent but mostly great narrative, many characters that are worth spending time with, a lot of very cool exploration, many surprising twists, and a wide variety of intense political situations. It's also set in a setting that's pretty rare to see in gaming, which is well executed as far as I'm concerned. Those are all things that, in my opinion, can easily make it worth the playthrough, especially if you can pick it up on sale and if the downsides that I mentioned earlier aren't deal breakers for you. But hey, you know what? It's only my opinion. If you want to make an informed decision, you should probably seek out more opinions and see what other people also think about the game. Personally, had I known what Greedfall had in store for me, I absolutely would have bought it. It's far from perfection, but with the right expectations, I think that it can be a lot of fun. So this pretty much sums up my main thoughts shortly after finishing the game, and hopefully it was helpful and you now have a better idea of what to expect from the game. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video if you enjoyed it or it was helpful. I'll be back soon with my spoiler-filled review of the game, which is pretty much what I'll start working on right after uploading that one. So I'll be back in a couple of days with that video. Bye bye.